everyone, and welcome to a very special holiday edition of your favorite security podcast, our favorite security podcast as well, Not Another Demo. I mean, I don't know if it's really a holiday edition, but it's the last one that we're doing before the end of the year. So, it's feeling kind of festive, and I thought, why not make it a holiday edition? And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Matt, bah humbug to that whole entire favorite security podcast thing. And to which I say, you have to really live in the past, present, and future of Not Another Demo so that it truly can be said of you that you knew how to keep Not Another Demo well. Damn, I got it in.
Your dad jokes still kill me, Matt. I don't think
I love it. I love it. I do that only to get a reaction from Anthony. So we are super excited this week. We are ending the year on what I think is going to be a fascinating topic. We got John Loya and Sean Keane from Cyberhaven, and we're going to talk for the podcast that doesn't like acronyms. We're going to talk about one. So, John, the first question I'm going to pass over to you. Both you guys, feel free to introduce yourselves. How dare I forget that I've got Lloyd and Anthony with me from the Really Bad Security crew. But first, tell us what DLP means. And in a world where we have a million meetings on our calendars every day, all day, right? Why would someone want to carve out a half an hour of their time to talk with Cyberhaven?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take that one. So my name's John Loya. I run the sales engineering team here at Cyberhaven. I've been here for about coming up on a year now. In the past, I've worked for organizations like Microsoft, Digital Guardian, McAfee. So I've definitely been in this, security and data protection space for a while. So DLP is data loss prevention, right? That's trying to maintain your data within your own environment, right? Every organization has sensitive data, whether that is, compliance data like credit card information or personal information like employee social security numbers or names and addresses or customer lists, right? But a lot of the times it goes beyond that into intellectual property or what we call IP, right? That's kind of, the secret sauce to any company. And that can be source code, that can be algorithms, it can be, processes, or can be contracts with, other manufacturers. That a lot of the times, trying to identify what is or isn't sensitive to each organization can be very unique. And kind of the core of that is that every organization needs to be able to make that data available to people in the organization, right? You've got sensitive data and someone's got to be able to access it. But then how do you make sure that that person is behaving correctly with that data? Are they putting it onto a USB stick? Are they printing that and taking that home? Are they uploading that to their own personal cloud environment? Right. Then so making sure that intellectual property, that sensitive data stays within your organization and is handled in the correct way is kind of what data loss prevention is geared around, to make sure that your insiders are handling your sensitive data correctly. And then,
all right, Sean, I'll let Sean introduce himself because this is opened up about 4 million questions in my head already. So we're going to have a fun one. But
all right,
Sean, let's hear it.
Hey guys, great to be here. Thank you for having us here today. So my name's Sean Keane. I am an enterprise account executive for Cyberhaven, and I cover the North Central region of the U.S. I've about 8 years experience in the data protection space, a bulk of that with Proofpoint/Observeit, focusing on insider risk management. And I've been with Cyberhaven for about 2 years. So really excited for this conversation here today.
So DLP, I'm going to steal the first one, Matt, because I think it's a good foundational question. So DLP isn't a new topic, right? What makes Cyberhaven different from any of the other solutions we know today?
Yeah, because
what's your edge? What's your competitive edge, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because when I bring up DLP, there's a lot of cringe moments when people even think about DLP. So,
yeah, data loss prevention is certainly not a new space, right? It's been around since early 2000s at least. And really, kind of the phrase that we use here a lot is that DLP is a 4-letter word, right? Which is, just to say that, it's spelled with 3 letters, but there's a lot of 4-letter words used whenever people talk about data loss prevention. It is frustrating and it is, wildly inaccurate historically, right? There's a ton of false positives. And most of that is due to the approach that you take to data loss prevention, right? You think about identifying sensitive information in your environment. And kind of the legacy solutions, what those do are go, okay, let's look for patterns. Let's look for keywords. Let's look for the word confidential in every email and every file and everything else. And that sounds logical, but the problem is that you end up picking up every email signature that says, the data in this file, in this email could be confidential, and you should, not forward it and treat it as such. And so you get this wild number of false positives, and then analysts just start to ignore it or hate it more specifically. And then, you've got a ton of issues on the endpoint in terms of performance and taking up CPU resources and everything else. So DLP has been around for a long time, but it really kind of has this bad name and this bad reputation. Our advantage and kind of our approach is what we call data lineage. This is, rather than relying on content inspection, which we can do if you have a need for that, but this concept of data lineage is, where does that data come from and how has it got to this point, right? So if you keep your sensitive data in, let's say, Salesforce, for example, right? Sean, as an account executive, can access Salesforce. He can download customer lists. And if Sean is, egressing that data, normally you would content inspect that. Well, the fact that it came out of Salesforce could be enough for us to go, that's sensitive data based on that context. We don't need to waste resources and time inspecting it, looking for keywords. It's where it came from that becomes important. And then if Sean emails it to me, now that's left its sort of source, right? It's no longer coming directly from Salesforce. It's now gone from Salesforce to Sean's computer to my computer through email, and then I can transfer it to USB. We see all of those operations, and we're able to follow it and go, okay, John's transferring data to USB stick that came from Salesforce, even though it was 2 computers back. So that lineage or that history becomes drastically important, and that's really kind of our differentiator.
So one of the things that, and maybe this data lineage thing helps with that, because I think one of the problems has been, a lot of data protection softwares that are out there. It's like you tell it what to go look at, and it'll go and audit and scan and all that. What you tell it to look at, Santa's here. But people put stuff everywhere. So, right. So I feel like that's always been a downfall of a lot of data platforms, is that, I'm doing a really good job of monitoring this server or this file share, but I've got files in 1,000 different places and I don't even know what they are, kind of thing. So what's your take on that situation?
Yeah. So that's kind of, the data that's already existing out there, that it's at rest in different locations. And there's certainly solutions, something like Varonis, for example, right? Or Spirion. They can go out and they can do what's called DAR, right? Or data at rest scans. So they can go out and identify where sensitive data is today. But again, they're going to be primarily reliant upon content, right? What's inside of the file. But once they find that data, they can either put a label or a tag on it, or they can quarantine that data, right? They can move it over into a repository where it should be. And then our solution can make use of either the tags or labels that are dropped onto the file by those solutions, or we can make use of the new repositories where that data has been gathered or quarantined into, to go, okay, if it comes out of this folder on a network share, then let's start tracing it, right? Let's start looking at the lineage of this file starting now.
Right.
But really kind of, go ahead.
And I was to say, a good DLP program is really 3-pronged, right? It starts with data discovery, and then moves on to data classification, and then you're at data loss prevention, right? So you need, I would say almost all 3 to really know where your data is and how it's moving.
A bit.
What's the take on classification? Because I hear both sides of that. Like, I believe it's good to know what your sensitive data is and where it is.
Yeah.
But that's also a challenge, right?
It is. Yeah. I'm going to address Anthony's concerns first, or comments first. So that concept of needing to do that data at rest and kind of discovering your data first, that's kind of the legacy approach to data loss prevention. And again, right, that logically makes sense, right? Okay, before I can protect anything, I need to know where it is. But the problem with that is that, oftentimes data at rest scanning can take time, right? You've got terabytes of data you've got to crawl through. You're keeping it in network shares, SharePoint, on endpoints, and at the end of that, you go, okay, here's where all my data was when I performed that data rest scan. So really kind of, what we're trying to change is the approach to data loss prevention. Rather than starting a project and then 6 months later, you're like, okay, now I know where data is. Now let me go on and protect that. We can give you the concept of identifying data based off of user activity. So if we're logging all this activity, copies, moves, uploads, downloads, emails, those sort of things, we can also give you an indication as to where people are interacting with sensitive data, right? Here's the network shares we see your engineering team interacting with. Here's the applications that HR is using. And those can be indicators of where sensitive data is. So rather than waiting 6 months, in a much shorter time frame, you can go, okay, I care about data that's coming out of Workday for HR. I care about data that's coming out of an CAD application for engineering. Let's go ahead and start protecting that data now, rather than running through the process of doing the data at rest scan and the tagging and labeling and everything else.
Sure.
And then,
is there any? So it sounds like you're fairly, well, you mentioned user behavior based.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any sort of like learning period? Or you guys just know in your application that Workday's got sensitive stuff in it, so therefore if we see something leave Workday, it's sensitive?
Yeah.
What's your approach to that?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of both, right? For a lot of organizations, we have out of the box sort of classification or data sets in terms of, we know sensitive data comes out of Workday, right? We know sensitive data for engineering comes out of AutoCAD. If we're talking to an entertainment industry, then we know that they're typically using Adobe products, whether that's Illustrator or Photoshop or something else. So right away, we can go to the organization and go, okay, what do you think sensitive data is coming out of? And then let's use that on day one. At the same time, we're going to log all the other activity, and then we can present that to them and go, okay, it looks like, you've got, Photoshop files that are not just coming out of, Photoshop, but they're also coming out of this other application. Is this something that handles sensitive data? Yes or no? And if so, let's also start tracking that activity. So we can do this sort of, top down where the customer tells us, here's where I keep my sensitive data, but we can also do this sort of bottom up approach where we go, here's where we see sensitive type of data, being stored or interacted with. And so we can kind of, bring both of those together to really kind of accelerate that value.
Sorry for late for joining, but I'm gonna back up even before the good questions that Anthony had. What's the first thing you do with a company that doesn't even have a data governance program? Do you have the ability to go in and guide them on baby steps at first? Or are you a little more honest? Do you have, the chutzpah to say, hey, you probably need to do X, Y, and Z before you use our tool, right? Mm-hmm. With the idea that your product is going to do better if they've, stood some things up, right? Because piggybacking on the stuff that Anthony says, I mean, we both live in the insurance world. There are certain areas where you want to put data governance, but Lloyd remembers on our insurance wing, like it's all over the place and they don't even know where to start with data governance. So do you have the means to start those conversations even before you talk classification, right? Because all the stuff Anthony said was 1,000% true, but I have to work with the business even earlier than that. Like, do you even know how you're going to classify your data?
Yeah. And that's a great point, right? I've talked to a lot of organizations and, the very mature ones go like, yeah, absolutely. Like, we have a governance program in place and here's where we keep sensitive data and here's how it should be handled. And, they're really got that environment sort of locked down and they're just looking for that enforcement piece. But more often than not, when I talk to organizations, they say, I don't know. I don't know where my data is. I don't know what applications people are using. I don't have insight into what they're doing when they're at home. And, so they're asking for that help. They're asking for that guidance. So kind of underlying our technology is that it logs activity, metadata about events, right? Copies, moves, uploads, all of those sort of operations. And if we're logging those, and if we're building the lineage together out of those, then we can just push out the agents. We can log that activity. And then what we bring to the customer, to the organization is here's where we see sensitive data residing or data that could be sensitive, right? We found a network
based
share
on like other similar clients. Cause I mean, that would be a good baseline. Like how do you how do you get a baseline to start with a company that like
Sure.
is, going day one governance?
Sure. So some of it is, experience with other organizations that are similar to them, right? And, I mentioned entertainment industry, right? Or engineering or manufacturing companies. We know the sort of tools that they use. We can also look at the repositories that they're being accessed most frequently, right? And I go, okay, I found a folder called accounting, or I found a folder called board slides. That's obviously something that you care about, right? And if you don't care about it, fine, right? We're still going to log that activity. But if you care about it, let's add that to our data set. Let's add that to something we start tracking. So we can absolutely help organizations to find how data is being interacted with and how it's being used. But at the end of the day, we need them to say, yes, that's data I care about. But we give them those reports and they can take that back to different groups and go, hey, here's what the guys from Cyberhaven thought was sensitive to your organization based off of activity coming from the HR department. Is this something you care about? Yes or no? And if yes, let's put it into the data set. Let's start tracking it. If not, we'll still log it. We still have a record of it, but it becomes a little bit more sort of, background noise.
Anthony, is that where you were thinking a little bit of difference between traditional behavior, right? Is you could be proactive and reactive with this?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's kind of legacy data loss prevention, right? Is, tell me what you want to block and we'll write a rule to block that thing. And that's great if you know where your risk is, but more often than not, right, that risk is kind of unknown. And so we can help, kind of shine a light onto that and say, okay, here's the actual activity. Here's who's using USB drives. Here's how often. Here's whether or not they're sharing them. Here's who's using home network shares as opposed to, corporate network shares. That sort of information will help you to identify your risk, and then we can put in controls to actually mitigate that.
So where do I missed, you probably already talked a little about the architecture, because that's usually the first thing that Anthony asks for is, what is your architecture?
Yeah.
So I missed that part. So apologize if this question's already been asked, but where does these initial logging happen, right? Because some of us are in the middle of a giant enterprise logging project, and there's stuff that I want to send directly to Splunk Cloud. There's stuff that I want to send to Cribble, and obviously with your analytic data, I shouldn't have to send it to Snowflake or other areas. So do you have is this a dashboard that I would log into to get stuff, or you had talked about reports, or is this more you can push out custom reports based on the types of analytics that Anthony wants to see?
Yeah. So the underlying architecture is that we really have two types of sensors. One of those is an endpoint agent, right? So that gets pushed out to every Mac and Windows system. And that's primarily logging the user activity, right? Anytime they're interacting with data, that's the operation we want to log. So that's how we get visibility into what users are primarily doing. We also have what we call cloud sensors. These are API connections into Office 365 or into Google Workspace that will give us additional visibility or metadata about an event. For example, if you send an email, from a Gmail account, or if you send it from your iPhone, we don't have an agent for iPhone, not today, but we will still get some visibility into that operation because we are connected into Office 365. So it's really kind of the marriage of primarily being the endpoint, and then the additional data that we're collecting from the APIs coming from cloud repositories.
So you're putting this in between my desktops and Office 365.
We're putting this on your desktop, and then that will log.
Sorry, I meant for the cloud-based one. So from cloud to cloud.
Not in between, right? We're not a network DLP, right? We're not breaking into network traffic. We're looking at API information so that we can get visibility and then in the future, ideally control. But the cloud sensor will give us visibility into those operations that we are not able to see from the endpoint agent.
Okay.
And then all that data is brought up into a cloud hosted console. And then users, admins can log into that console to get visibility into where that data is coming from, going to, who's touched it, that sort of thing.
Does this tie into, do you have API functionalities that ties into other things? So your deep watches, your different alerting systems.
Yeah, we can absolutely export data out to Splunk, and for example, right, we have a Splunk app that's available on the store. But we can export data out to whatever format you need. So if you need to integrate with a UEBA, I should explain that. User 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 and event behavioral analysis. And SIM being somebody help me out here.
Security incident and event management.
I was gonna say Anthony should know that with his eyes closed, hung over.
Can you imagine just saying those all day long, though? I mean, we know why there's acronyms, but
Yeah.
I like EU. I always thought it should have been EUBA, not UEBA. And then user behavioral analytics just sounds better.
Right. And then we do have,
right? And that's kind of a big piece for you. Well, I mean, for your industry or as an entity, right? Because we've talked about that a lot, that it's not just users that are doing things now. You've got non-users, you've got devices, you've got other systems, you've got OT systems that are
robotic process automation. Yeah. I'm living that nightmare. I won't say nightmare, that dream, right? Because it is a dream for the business, and we are knee deep in it. John, that brings up a good point. Can your product distinguish between what we call in the RPA world like an attended robot and an unattended robot, right? So an attended one is, where it's running scripts. You have several different scripts running on a laptop or a workstation that you still have a human being on doing stuff, and then the robot's doing stuff alongside it. And then we have the concept of unattended, right? Where you have, Anthony spun up a VM, right? That's going to do robotic scripting to these systems completely unattended, right? So can you distinguish between both of those?
No. So we're very much focused on user sort of activity, right? Or endpoint activity where we have agents, where we have visibility. So, if we have an endpoint agent on a system and there is some sort of application or script running, we will see that application, interacting with the data, right? So we can see it opening files, we can see it writing files, that sort of thing. But, very specifically, we're not, trying to replace EDR or AV. So we're not looking at low-level events like DLL loads or that sort of thing. We're not looking for malware. We can certainly run side by side.
It saves you a lot of overhead.
It saves us a lot of overhead, and we can run side by side with solutions like CrowdStrike, but we're not a kernel level agent, and we're not looking to see that sort of activity. We can see some indicators sometimes, right? Every application that runs, we are logging command line operations, but there's a lot there in terms of malware that we're just not going to see.
So tell us about
in your defense. Sorry, Anthony, go ahead. I was going to say, in your defense, you're not advertising AV.
No, certainly not. Certainly not.
Sorry, tell us about, no, you're good. So tell us about the alerts that we could be getting and the context that's provided, and kind of the agent interaction. And when I say agent, I mean like analyst interaction with the platform.
Sure. Yeah. I'll give you a, kind of a common example, right? John Loya has taken sensitive data and it contains social security numbers, and he's transferred that over to a USB. Now your analysts typically, right, they're going to look at that and they're going to go, okay, is this or is this not a false positive? That's what your DLP analyst has to do today. And then, they've got to try and grab the file from the endpoint. They've got to look at it. They've got to look at sample matches and go, okay, is this customer information or is this his own social security number, right? What's sort of the context? And that's what's missing. And that's what has to be manually hunted. For us, because we have that lineage aspect, we can go, okay, John got this, as a email attachment from Sean, and Sean downloaded this file from SharePoint, and it was Matt who actually downloaded the file from Salesforce and then uploaded it to SharePoint. So that gives your analysts sort of that contextual information that they're missing to go, okay, this is definitely not a false positive. And in fact, we're not even going to generate an incident unless it has the content patterns and that context to indicate. Well, depending upon how
See,
you
that
set
would
it.
be good, right? Because Lloyd and I have use cases, right? Well, not anymore. Lloyd's 1 year to the dark side, so he
Yes,
doesn't,
sir.
not anymore. But I mean, we have that would be a valid use case for some of our clinics, right? Because there's times where we still have to do manual transfer from, legacy clinical machines to to workstations and stuff. So believe it or not, and going into 2023, USB still has its place, right? And it's going to,
Absolutely.
PACS is a good example. PACS images, right? So there are times where you have to pull it from the imaging system, your MRI, and you got to upload it to Epic.
And that's the other side of it, right? Especially in healthcare is a lot of that data you can't content inspect, right? You've got CAT scan images, you've got x-rays, you've got all sorts of things that don't contain traditional sort of content of medical record numbers. But to your point, if it comes out of the Epic system, that's the indicator for us that that's sensitive. And then, if you egress it yourself, great. We'll catch that immediately right away. But if you start sending that around or storing a network share and then Lloyd picks it up from the network share and then egresses it, we still have that lineage to go, okay, that data came from Epic.
How is tuning done, or how easy is it rather to do some of that tweaking and tuning? Because I imagine there are applications out there that have sensitive information that you've never heard of before. There are ones every day I'm running into that I've never heard of before.
Absolutely.
So, there are custom built and there are just weird industries, right, who
Yep.
Have access to sensitive information you may not have something built for already.
Yeah, exactly, right. So we do have, a lot of the default sort of out of the box policies that would be set up to be in monitor mode, right? If there's an application that's accessing sensitive data, let's go ahead and log that. And then from that, we can go, okay, over the past 30 days, here's the applications that have touched sensitive data. And a lot of those, right, are going to be apparent, right? You've got Acrobat or something else or Word, and those are, immediately whitelisted. But then to your point, right, there's going to be unknown applications. And sometimes the security department can, look into that because we've got, path and everything else, and you can Google it and go like, all right, well, what is this application? But more often than not, it's helpful to send that information to the group that's using the application and go, okay, here's an application we saw that's interacting with sensitive data. Should it or shouldn't it? And if it should, let's whitelist it, right? We'll still monitor it, but we're not going to set off any sort of alarm for it. But if it shouldn't, then let's escalate that one, right? Let's start generating incidents. Let's, put up prompts to the user to educate them, or potentially just flat out block that.
So can you write custom filtering rules, so to speak? So based on volume. So I'm thinking use case, if I get a onesie or twosie, smaller amount of data being pulled out that needs to be looked at, that to me is a little bit lower priority, right? Like, okay, hey, I'm doing this hot item right now this afternoon. I have some free time. So it's important to look at, but it's not something you have to drop everything for. So do you have that kind of customizability? Is that a word? Customizability?
Yeah.
Yes, we do have that type of customizability within the product. So you can assign different weights of risk to operations. And even if it's not assigned a weight, we're still logging that operation, right? We need to log operations in order to be able to build out that lineage. So it could be that, you rename a file, and that could be important to us later on down the road. So we do need to log that operation. So we always have visibility into these operations, even if it's not a high, medium, or low sort of risk. And then later, whenever you go, okay, I know I haven't been looking at, Box, or I haven't been looking at WeChat operations, but, now, this has come up on the radar because of a news report or something else. Over the past 90 days, has anybody in my organization used WeChat? Even though we don't have a rule for that, maybe, we're still logging that activity. So you can query the system historically to go, okay, here's all the users that used WeChat, here's all the types of files they sent out, and here's where that data came from. And then you can take a look at that and go, okay, did that come from a sensitive repository, or did that come from something that's not yet sensitive? Do we care about this data, yes or no? And should we build that into a policy? Should we build that into a data set so we can identify that it's classified data. But it's using visibility.
How long is it queryable, right? Do you have the ability to keep it for X amount of days hot and then we can move it somewhere colder?
Yeah, so it depends upon, how much retention you purchase, right? Some customers go like, I only need 90 days worth of data. Some customers go, I need a year. And some customers say, I need 3 years of live data. So there is obviously a huge cost to us to store that data.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would argue that company could probably move it to Glacier or something.
Yeah.
Just an agreement with you. Could I get that data thawed within 24 hours?
But more
I don't even think, Anthony, you don't even ask for hot data that long, do you?
For how long?
1 year?
1 year?
Yeah.
So my sim has 13 months hot data.
Mm-hmm. It's not just the retention, it's the processing, right? And the other thing to keep in mind is that, we're not using tags or labels. We can read those, but we're not placing a tag on a file if we identified it sensitive. It's simply based off of that lineage, right? So you can think about it in terms of a family tree, right? Think about Epic as, I don't know, King George or something, right? And all of the descendants that have come out of Epic that, you can point at and go, okay, yeah, I'm related to King George, by 7, I don't know, generations back. That's what we do with files. But at some point you go, oh, King George had like, a kid or something. And now we want to look at all of the children, all of the lineage that came out of that. We can now say, okay, this origin is also sensitive. So anything that came out of this over the past 90 days, a year, whatever, is now also considered sensitive. But we have to process through all of those events.
I was going to say that could get intensive pretty fast if you want to go like 3 or 4 levels deep.
Absolutely.
I do have to drop because I have to get my little one. You guys, nice to meet you. And at least Matt won't have to worry about me yapping anymore. I got presents.
Nice meeting you.
Bye.
So John, are you also able to actually stop stuff from happening or flag people when they're doing stuff, or, that kind of like coaching thing, like, hey, are you really sure you should be doing this? Or can you talk a little bit about the, a lot of people will show you what's wrong. A lot of people will tell you things that are going on. Not a lot of companies are actually stopping this stuff from happening. So talk about that part a little bit.
Yeah, there are a lot of, players in the space, especially kind of newer players that advertise themselves as data loss prevention, when in reality they are data loss detection, right? They can see it, they can alert you to it, but they can't actually prevent or block it. We absolutely can take action on that to mitigate risk. And that can be putting up a prompt and blocking a user and saying, this is sensitive data, you're not allowed to transfer this to your personal OneDrive, for example. And we can flat out halt and hard stop that right then and there. Or we can take a software approach and we can put up a prompt that says, hey, this looks like sensitive data. It looks like you're taking this to, your personal OneDrive or to your personal Google Docs. And this is not permitted, but if you feel that you need to do this, then you can continue through, but tell us why. So you can put up this sort of prompt.
That is the key thing for me, at least, right? So
absolutely.
Because we have obviously being working in the insurance industry, a lot of people have access to a lot of sensitive information that they should have, right? Like we're insurance. So moving some of those files and things, having that prompt to say, acknowledge that you're doing this can then help down the road should we need to, we'll say, take litigation or action against them to be like, look, you did this data was exfiltrated, but you also clicked this button that said, yes, I wanted to do this. So it adds that evidence to it.
That is exactly it. The other side of it is that a lot of security teams don't know what should or shouldn't be blocked, right? You think, USB sticks are bad, I'm going to block those. And then inevitably help desk is going to get lit up with customers that go, I need this, right? I'm setting up a new server and I've got the image on a USB stick and I've got to be able to use this. So putting up that soft prompt allows you to gather information about how customers or how, that the employees are interacting with those sort of egress vectors. And then you can take that to the data owners or to the managers and go, okay, here's what's going on. Should they or shouldn't they? If they should, let's take away the prompt, right? Let's not interfere with every single time that they're transferring data to a USB stick. This is a sanctioned business operation for this user or this device or this group. But if they shouldn't, let's ramp that up, right? And let's block that activity. And then to your point, some organizations just want to log, right? They don't want to interact. They don't want to educate. They just want to log that activity and then use that for, so it's sort of legal purposes if needed.
Can you block and prompt on external collaboration in SharePoint, for example? I'm assuming you can. You can see what external collaborators are doing and block them if they're sharing something they shouldn't be.
Yeah, well, that's an area that we're expanding on now. So today we have some gaps in that. For example, within Google Drive, for example, right? We just recently introduced the ability to detect if somebody is, right-clicking on a file and choosing share. We certainly have gaps in that area, and that's something that we're looking to improve upon.
Can you track across tenants as well? So if I have like a B2B setup with another, 365 tenant, can you track down into that other tenant, or how far do you get that visibility if there's that cross collaboration between tenants?
We don't today have, cross contamination of data, right? Everybody has their own sort of environment. So once it leaves your environment, we lose visibility into that. But one of the things we've talked about doing is being able to generate reports, right? So let's say I'm in the manufacturing space, I'm taking in, parts and CAD files from different organizations and then generating it. A lot of the times those organizations have to prove to the partner organization that they are behaving properly with that sensitive data. So we're looking at generating reports that they can then hand off to go, okay, your data came in on this date and it's been touched by these users and it's been stored in these locations and it has not been transferred to USB or printed or anything else, right? It kind of gives that peace of mind, but we don't have cross-contamination of data today.
So one final question. Can you talk a little bit about what a POV scenario looks like, how much work it is to get stood up, how long it runs? What's that process look like?
Sure. To get set up, we host the cloud console, so there's no work for the customer there. What they need to do is be able to push out agents. Sometimes that's easy enough and trivial, and they can do that. Other times it takes weeks of processing internally to get that approval. But once agents are deployed out, then we get visibility coming into the console. If there are specific use cases that they want to block or control, we'll do that on day one. More often than not, it's let's push out the agents, let's let it run for a week or 2 weeks, and then we'll review the activity and we'll show you where data is coming from, where it's going to. We'll create those data sets, right? The classification, and we'll show you, where we think sensitive data is coming from and how that's being interacted with and if there's any risk involved with that data.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, fellas, I learned something today. I learned that we said USB a bunch and no one ever called anyone out on that one, but it's Universal Serial Bus, which I don't even know what that means. So back in the 90s when we invented that thing, we were like, Universal.
If you don't know what USB is, you shouldn't be listening to this podcast, probably.
I Googled it real quick. I'll be honest. I was like, what the heck does that even mean again? But yes, we weren't that cool. We didn't have great marketing people to come up with cool terms back in the 90s when we invented the Universal Serial Bus. Anyways, if you are, maybe you've struggled with DLP in the past. Maybe you've had some challenges. Maybe you're worried about, where your data is going and what people are doing with it. I recommend you take a look at Cyberhaven. Give them a chance and take a different approach to DLP, which we're always a big fan of here, of companies that are coming in and innovating and doing things different. John, Sean, thank you very much. Lloyd, Anthony, as always. For everyone that's watching on whatever platform you're watching it on, like, subscribe, do all of that sort of fun stuff. Thank you for sticking with us through a very busy 2022, and we are super excited to bring you more, not another demo, in 2023. Thanks, everyone.